Today, friends, we're going to be showcasing the Fire Battle Mage build, sometimes known as the Fat Gandalf build. It is an interesting one. It utilizes Tower Shield and the sword, kind of like a tank with heavy armor, but then we have a Fire Staff in there as well. This build I would consider a bit more of a meme build or something that's fun, but it is actually pretty effective in certain situations. I use it often in Outpost Rush or 3v3 Arena, but I believe you could use it for sort of solo farming, clearing corrupted breaches, and a bunch of other PvE activities as well. So we're going to go over the weapon choices, the weapon mastery, the stats, the armor, all of that stuff that makes this build tick. And as always, if you guys enjoy these sort of build breakdown videos, make sure you go ahead and leave a like, subscribe if you want to see more content, and let's jump in with the Fat Gandalf, shall we? So first things first, the weapon choice. We have opted to go for Sword and Shield and Fire Staff. This is actually a build that's been around for a little while now, and I will say, I don't want to take credit for creating this build. It was actually when I was doing a 3v3 arena, I went against Gun Junkie, is his name, on the Barry server, and I saw him rocking this build, and it was actually very effective and very hard to deal with. So the whole sort of concept is you are basically a tank. You're using a Shield Rush to apply weakens and slows. You have the Shield Bash to stun people, and the Leaping Strike to either get in or get out of combat. But then we have the Defensive Formation to provide some damage mitigation to your teammates and to yourself. So yeah, we got this sort of tank, but also aggressive aspects to it as well, where we're trying to leap on people and then stun them. Again, more PvP oriented than PvE. And taking a look at the Fire Staff, which is over here, our main sort of tool that we're going to be using with the Fire Staff is the Flamethrower. This is a Flamethrower centric build, but we also have Fireball and Burnout. In the past, I have used Pillar of Fire in place of Fireball. Honestly, I think there's pros and cons to both of them, but right now we're using Fireball for a little bit of extra AoE damage, and you do want to pick up the Runes of Helios over here. The idea is that you stand in this as much as you can, and it's going to increase your damage. And the damage, like I say, it can actually be surprisingly pretty good for a heavy armor sort of tank build. Now, taking a look at the stats, we did actually get 100 extra points to play around with the Rise of the Angry Earth expansion, and we have opted to go to 250 Constitution, 350 Intelligence. I know you guys might be asking, well, what about the Sword and Shield? The Sword and Shield is pretty much just there for utility. So this is our weapon where we're just using it for the abilities and the ultimate. We're not really trying to do damage with the Sword and Shield. And I'll show you guys a little bit of gameplay as we sort of talk through this description. Whenever it seems relevant to pop it up. We have Burnout over here, which we often use as a tool, again, to get in and out of combat. We're going to be combining these abilities with certain perks on our armor and weapons to sort of modify and increase their power. But effectively, Flamethrower is the main weapon that we're going to be using most of the time. Fireball for a little bit of poke damage, or Pillar of Fire, and Burnout again to get in and out. And the same with the Sword and Shield. This is for engaging or running away. This is something that you typically want to pop, and then you go into block afterwards. So we do Shield Rush, and then you hold up your block to wait for your potions to come off cooldown, or wait for your dash to come off cooldown to get out of a tricky situation. And this, typically Shield Bash, you'll Leaping Strike in, and then you'll Shield Bash the target, and switch over to the Fire Staff, Fireball, and immediately follow up with the Flamethrower, and it's actually quite a lot of damage. So again, we'll be showing a little bit of gameplay on the video to give you guys an idea of how this build sort of breaks down and how you would actually play it. If you did want to put some points in strength for whatever reason, you could look to go to, I don't know, 25 or 50, maybe all the way up to 100, but really the intelligence with the ability damage, it's really, you don't want to give up on that 350, and I think at least 200 Constitution is something you want to rock as well. 250 doesn't actually make that much of a difference, but we're looking at that sort of walking tank, but also able to do a lot of damage with the Fire Staff. That's the whole concept. So I wouldn't change the stats too much, but if you wanted to take some points out of Constitution to put them in strength, it wouldn't be the end of the world. Now we're going to move over to the armor and the equipment that makes this build tick. So we are using the Artifact Sword here, interestingly enough. I know you guys might be asking, well, isn't there an Artifact Fire Staff that scales off of strength? There is. It's called Inferno, and after playing with it pretty extensively on the test server, I can say that it honestly doesn't feel very good to use. It's a shame because the Hellfire's Fury, where you do 20% extra damage when you hit a target within 5 meters, would be great for the Flamethrower. But sadly, the damage just doesn't feel too good on this one. I think it's because it's doing strike damage. It's hard to stack that up, and we'll explain a little bit more about that in a second. But yeah, the Butcher has been our artifact weapon of choice. I don't think this really is super necessary, to be honest. You could just rock an ordinary sword, but if you want to pick this one up, it drops from the final boss of Dynasty Shipyard. It's Empress Taeying, I think is what she's called. And then we also have the Wall, good old Wall here. The Wall is going to be great for your survivability. You could also rock a piece of artifact sort of armor up here, but I think the Wall is kind of fun to go in with this build because you can hold up block for a much longer amount of time, and the idea is when you switch to sword and shield, you suddenly become so much tankier because all of these sort of perks kick in. This one you can get from the Ennead. It drops from the final boss called Heru, so if you do the Ennead expedition, you have a chance to get this off the final boss. And then finally, our other artifact is Blood Drinker. Now this, I'm not entirely sure whether it's correct to take this or not, because you do lose 25% damage, but that 25% lifesteal is very powerful with this build. And then we have the Leeching Hearty and Keen as well. I think one thing that you probably want to do is replace that Keen Awareness with the perk that just gives you more fire damage. So you can get fire damage on your ring, and that's probably really going to help you out. So I haven't done that yet, but I do think it would be a good idea. To get this ring, you need to kill the final boss of Starstone Barrows. I think it's called Grengel or something like that. Yeah, Grengel has a chance to drop Blood Drinker, and I think it's an optional piece of equipment, but the 25% lifesteal does help with sustain a lot, and the 25% lifesteal triggers off of your damage over time effects, which you do have a lot of them, so you'll often find that you pop Flamethrower into a crowd of players, or mobs, and you get a lot of lifesteal off of it. Now let's move over to the weapon, because this is the Fire Staff is probably one of the most important parts of this build other than the artifacts. We are rocking a Fire Staff with Flame Attunement, Keenly Jagged, and Vicious. I think Vicious could be replaced with Accelerating Flamethrower if you want to lean a bit more into the meme side of things, but Flame Attunement and Keenly Jagged feel like they're very important. These can both proc off of Flamethrower attacks, so every time you hit somebody with a Flamethrower, it does count as an attack, and you can trigger this every 1.5 seconds for some bonus fire damage. Also using the Ignited Gambit gem, so this is an opal gem with the Rune Glass of Ignition or whatever it's called. But this hits inflict burn, dealing 8% fire damage. You're basically trying to stack up as much fire damage as you can. So I think a Fire Staff with these exact perks, maybe changing Vicious to something that's more good for you. Also, Keenly Jagged, the Flamethrower can crit, and you can land bleeds onto the enemy as well. So again, you're going to see the numbers popping up. They can be pretty impressive once you stack like all of these perks together with the Flamethrower. Moving over to the armor, one thing that's pretty cool in the Rise of the Angry Earth expansion is we now have this fire harnessing perk here. It says you deal 2% fire damage, and then we also have the Rune Glass gems, which say your fire attacks deal 2% damage. So every piece of armor has this sort of combination going, fire harnessing and the Rune Glass diamond gem. So we have 2 and 4, so that's 4, 8, 12, 16, 20% bonus damage across all of our armor to fire damage, and then again with the ring that could be even more fire damage. It actually does stack up in a pretty major way, leading you to do some pretty crazy numbers even though you're in heavy armor and you know, you're kind of like a tank at the same time. So health and elemental aversion is something that I opted to go for on all of the pieces where I could, although I did try to max out the refreshing as well. I think we're 1 stack short here, but refreshing just to lower the cooldown of the fireball, the shield bash and stuff like that. Other perks that I opted to go for are fortifying burnout, just to give us a little bit of extra tankiness, and of course the accelerating flamethrower feels like you gotta run it in this build as well. Moving over to the jewelry, it's not really perfect because getting good jewelry on the test server has been a bit of a pain in the butt. I do want to say this video was recorded on the test server, so there might be some slight changes in damage numbers and how this build works when this actually comes out live, but I'm pretty confident that this build is still going to be effective once it hits the expansion on the 3rd of October. But anyway, the amulet has health refreshing and stamina recovery. You could look to replace that stamina recovery with some sort of protection if you know you're going to be playing against a particular weapon. So thrust protection comes to mind for all the spears and blunderbusses, but maybe slash protection for great swords. Some sort of amulet with those combination of perks I think is going to be good to go for. You want to make sure you always have health on your amulet though, gonna help us stay alive. We already covered Blood Drinker and how disgusting that is. And then finally the earring. Honestly, I think earrings are like the least important part of builds these days. Refreshing Toast is probably a pretty important perk, and maybe Empowering Toast, you can drink a regen potion before you go in. And I think regenerating is also good as well, but it doesn't really feel like there's any perks that you really need to have on the earring these days, honestly. The heart rune that I opted to go for, funny enough, is a fire damage related heart rune. I just wanted to really lean into all that extra fire damage that we're getting from the rune glass gems and the fire harnessing. So I went for the brutal heart rune of Firestorm. It says Firestorm travels faster and deals 200% weapon damage, but it no longer applies burn. But the 200% weapon damage up front sometimes can be the finisher that you need. And like I say, it felt like Firestorm was the way to go with all this sort of fire-orientated build. Now, we kind of already covered the gems a little bit. I think, obviously, rune glass gems that increase your fire damage are going to be very necessary. You can only put those in your armor and not in your jewelry. And obviously, you want to take a gem that's going to give you the fire damage tick as well. I opted to go for the opal gem because opal's pretty easy to activate. You just dodge. But you could also look to get like a jasper or even a diamond gem if you think you're going to be at full health. But you definitely want to put all of the ignited rune glass casing around them, which you can do with the stone cutter. Makes the build, you know, extra spicy, add some damage. In the jewelry, again, I just opted for diamonds. I think the biggest threat is usually physical. Elemental could be a bit of a problem as well, so you can change the gems depending on what sort of damage you feel like you're going to face the most. So if you're facing more elemental damage, you go for opal gems or for malachite gems. If you know there's one particular damage you're going up against, like lots of great swords, like I say, I think it's moonstone is slash damage absorption, or you can go for cut pristine emeralds if you need that thrust damage absorption for bows and muskets. Kind of change the gems as you see fit, but for me, diamonds are the nice one-size-fits-all. Lastly, the only other thing to really talk about is consumables, and it's kind of like the basic stuff. Infused health potions, infused mana potions, infused regen potions. You can pop all of these. If you can get the healthy toast perk on your earring, you can actually get a little bit of a heal off of your mana potions as well. Oak flesh bomb is great if you're going up against physical damage dealers. You can craft these at the, I think it's at the outfitter. And then gemstone dust is also like sort of likewise for elemental as well. So gemstone dust if you're facing off against mages or elemental damage, and then oak flesh bomb if you're facing off against physical damage dealers. You want to make sure you have a honing stone active most of the time. To pop these, you now need to put them on your hotbar. It's a bit awkward. And then for PvE, you can also rock coatings as well. So you're going to put a coating on each weapon, like so, and then we weapon swap and we're going to put a coating. Honestly, you don't really need to worry about a coating on the sword because it's not really used that much. Ward potions can be good if you know one particular damage type. So we're about to jump down and try and take on these corrupted here at this portal. So if we pop a ward potion as well, that's going to help us stay alive a little bit longer. And then let's just jump in and have a little bit of fun with this build, shall we? All right, so we get a nice big pack of enemies, fireball down on the ground, and you can see we actually start getting a lot of lifesteal as we go in with the fire staff as well, putting dots on enemies. Starts, ticks up the healing pretty extreme, and then even when we're not in combat, we're like healing quite a lot. Look at all that healing there. My health patch just going back up because we got all the dots on the enemies. So a lot of fun to be had with this build. Like I say, it is a bit of a silly one, and it is susceptible to sort of CC. If you get staggered while you're using flamethrower, you can't use flamethrower for a little bit longer, but then you can always just put the dots on the enemies, hold the shield, and just start healing while you wait for the dots to sort of tick your life back up, and then again reapply all of the burns on as many enemies as you can, fireball on the ground, and then go back into block mode and just get a nice big heal off of all of the dots again. So yeah, it's a silly build, but it's a fun build at the same time. Like I say, it's one of my favorite ones to use in PvP, and I thought we'd just break down how you can go for it. The most important aspects of the build is getting a nice flamethrower, or getting a good staff for the flamethrower abilities, getting those fire harnessing perks, getting those rune glass gems, getting that fire damage perk on your ring, and probably going for the what is it called, the blood drinker as well. The blood drinker does feel like it's very necessary in order to really make this build work and give you that survivability from putting all of the dots on the enemies. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the old like and subscribe does go a long way to sort of supporting the content and showing that you guys want to see more of this sort of silly build breakdowns. If you got any suggestions or any other different ways that you guys could imagine piloting this build, let me know in the comments down below if there's something else that you would like to see, or a build suggestion or something that we can go into. Yeah, comments as well. And to see more of this sort of gameplay live, we are going to be over on Twitch streaming and playing the Rise of the Angry Earth expansion pretty much every day for the first few weeks that it comes out. So link to this stream in the description down below. But with that being said, I'll catch you guys all in the next video.